Tactics and Practice Podcast.
Dobar dan, everyone, and welcome to the Tactics and Practice Podcast, the audio extension of Aksioma Institute for Contemporary Art's discursive program of the same name, focusing on investigative art, society, and new technologies. This podcast series is part of the 15th edition of Tactics and Practice called Unreal Data, Real Effects. I'm your host, Neja Berger, and I conducted a series of interesting conversations on this topic. In the previous episodes, I talked to Felix Stalder about quantification and individuality, discussed historical and alternative aspects of this quantification with Wendy Huikyung Chun, and explored further methodologies for investigating them with Eric Salvaggio. But today there's a bit of a shift, as these two last episodes will focus more on maybe we could say the real effects of the unreal data in some way. We'll start with a dive into online cultures with Günseli Yalcinkaya. Günseli is an internet folklorist, an author and editor at Dazed, and the host of Logged On, a Dazed podcast. Hi.
Hi.
I'm really happy to talk to you today. First of all, before we get into main points of our discussion today, I have to say how much respect I have for anyone with the sheer mental strength to really research the deepest pits of online culture like you do. And I really don't think there's another way to do it properly than to immerse oneself into it and suffer the consequences. Personally, I've done some incel research a few years ago, which was extremely anxiety inducing. And I've only just started working on some TikTok research for my day job, let's say, at the university. And it has already, to use language I've picked up there, permanently altered my brain chemistry. And mind you, I am medicated already. So how do you do it is my first question.
Yeah, no, I feel like it's really being deep in those trenches. But yeah, I completely agree with you. There's so much stuff out there that's absolutely cooked. I think actually sitting down and being able to sit and digest the information as opposed to letting it just kind of wash over you, which might be the temptation, is a trickier job than some, I guess. But yeah, I think, for me at least, I kind of just look into certain things that I find interesting anyway, and then let yourself fall into those respective wormholes. That being said, they're not always the nicest places to be. I think the internet can, as much as it is amazing and exciting and psychedelic, it's also horribly terrifying and deeply distressing at the same time.
Yeah, I've read some very witty and poetic and highly relatable descriptions from you in your pieces about this full-on mind-flattering feeling of being stuck in the scroll, consuming content which is, as you call it, sensorically rich yet devoid of meaning. And if I may quote a sentence you wrote, "Stuck in a dopamine-driven feedback loop, we chug on Lost Marys and pop away at our fidget toys, then dissociate with a bump of ketamine and Control-Z reality." Which needs no further explanation for those listening who indulge in the mind flattening themselves. But I just felt like that articulation was so sincere in talking about being chronically online, but at the same time intertwined with the kind of online meta humor and language. Speaking of language, people listening to this Tactics and Practice podcast are generally very international. The podcast is, of course, in English, so it's accessible to as many people as possible. And English is also the lingua franca of a big chunk of online culture. And I kind of have no idea what's happening in other languages, except I can see a bit of what's happening in Slovenian, on Slovenian internet. And now what's happening there is, and this is purely anecdotal and not properly researched, but I feel like very similar cultural trends are emerging, always with a bit of a delay. And this is not just an online culture thing. We often see this Americanization of political discourse in populist rhetorics here. But online, it's like a trend will emerge with a delay. and be derivative of something we've seen 5 years ago. Just last year, we got our very own local trad wife, Catholic Jesus worshipping influencers, and super weird within our cultural context. And we have our local incels now. And interestingly, in the last 2 months, this girl blogging blew up on Slovenian Instagram and just became huge overnight with several new pages. And it's super interesting to me how they use language. It's a weird kind of literal translation of something that was funny in English first. And you only find it funny because you know the original, and there's an extra layer of being a sort of inside joke. Also, the translations are not properly translated. It's more Slovenified English words that don't exist, if you know what I mean. So that's something I was wondering about. Do we know what's happening outside of English? And do you have any thoughts or observations about this?
Yeah, I mean, so like disclaimer, I operate in the English speaking memescape and internet field. I mean, I'm from Turkey, I'm from Istanbul, but I'm not as tapped into Turkish memes as such. But saying that, I think what you're saying really reminds me of, I was speaking to an internet researcher the other day. We were talking about, I mean, this was in the context of attributing different online archetypes such as the Sigma or the male manipulator or the femcel to certain artists, musicians, kind of aesthetic signifiers. And he made a really good point where he was saying that, for instance, in China, they have a separate internet, obviously. And even though they don't have the term incel or the term femcel, they have different words which have come up at different points in time which signify the same things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I definitely feel like there is this kind of overlapping. I know in my head, like the way that I see it is just as in the kind of pre-Enlightenment times fairy tales, the same kind of figures or archetypes would crop up in different parts of the world without any kind of direct connection to each other. We also see that happen in different kind of bubbles on the internet. Obviously, these ones are more directly related because of the networked nature of everything. But
oh yeah, that's interesting, because the memes or little online trends that I was talking about on Slovenian Instagram and TikTok are very obviously connected to the trends elsewhere.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like a Slovenified template and sometimes adapted to the local context or event, but mostly not really. Mostly it's just translated. So that's interesting that these tropes or memes or cultural trends that you mentioned would independently emerge. You mentioned Chinese internet, which is really not interconnected in that sense.
Yeah, no, totally. And yeah, like side note, I would also love to see these Slovenian memes. I would most definitely not understand the linguistics of it, but that sounds super interesting.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to spam you with those. And I admire the masochistic curiosity of you online researchers. Okay, so the point of these local memes and trends being derivative of global trends can be a nice transition to us talking about a sameness on a different level. So in this podcast series, we talked a lot about algorithms and ML models. And today I thought we could take a look at how these models are also impacting online cultures and implicitly us and institutions, and in a circle then back to the models. More on that later. So first, if we look at this big change, right? The shift from chronological to algorithmic timelines on mainstream platforms. In one of your pieces, you say, if the medium is the message, then today's medium is the algorithm. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how the algorithm is shaping us as this universal mediator and how the content itself changed, especially in the context of having to adjust to algorithmic curation, and how we as content producers and consumers have also changed in relation to the algorithms curating.
Yeah, gosh, I feel like I could speak for so long about this
Feel
topic.
free. Yes, let's go.
I'll just I'll spitball for a bit. But I guess, okay, so the short answer I would say is that content becomes mid. Mid is a word that, I don't know, I guess is like a good gateway for exploring and answering your question, perhaps. What I would define as the kind of epicenter of the Overton window of taste, but it's also just a meme that was flying around in the last year or so. But I think it says a lot about how, especially post-pandemic, we've seen, as you said, culture dominated by this kind of algorithmic sameness. The way that we've seen that disseminated across culture and online culture is literally everywhere. So I think most recently, something that stuck in my head is the repetition of artists, how we only have the same artists, musicians dominating the end of year lists across most major publications, or the fact that Taylor Swift is as big as she is right now with no seeming like rivals on the horizon, the homogenization of our facial features, the aesthetic trends, viral trends that we adopt on TikTok, which then in turn shape our behavior offline as well. And like the arrangement of our faces, you could say, like through actual material beauty trends such as fillers and the viral face filters that we use. Also, even the way we speak. I wrote a piece a few months ago called "Blessed and Emoji Pilled," which goes further into detail about this. This one I find particularly interesting because, I feel that because of the flattening effect that the algorithm gives, where it incentivizes certain content over others, the content that is pushed to the top of your feed is that kind of algorithm-friendly repetition that's quantified by clicks and likes. It's usually it's always the stuff that gets the most engagement and is usually monetized. And I guess this stuff, because it's the mid, it's the most accessible content. Yeah, I'd say it's usually the ones directed towards more repetitive content or stuff that's quite kind to our attention spans. So anything that doesn't play by the rules of those systems gets downvoted or pushed down the feed. Yeah, does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, it makes all of the sense. I'd like to point out here that anyone interested in the cultural phenomenon of the mid can also listen to an entire podcast episode on this very topic on Logged On, the podcast by Dazed, which is hosted by Günseli. But yeah, moving on, maybe we could take one of these points and elaborate it a little bit. And I thought faces are quite a tangible way to talk about material consequences. Maybe you could tell us a bit about the latest weird ass trends going on with people look maxing, the filters, the bone smashing, the jaw thing.
Oh my gosh, the jaw thing.
Just please elaborate.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's such a spiral. I mean, I guess what you just touched on is the more incel coded side of what we're seeing across TikTok. These things that started off in 4chan and incel forums now becoming very mainstream through viral face filters across TikTok. But maybe just to backtrack a bit so we can kind of lay the groundwork out for that. I think it's really interesting, or at least I find it interesting, to look at the way the algorithm is shaping our beauty standards, especially since the dawn of Instagram face, which was, maybe fact check me on this, but I want to say the Gia Tolentino article came out in 2019. And I think even since then, we've seen such a change. Obviously, the pandemic and TikTok becoming the primary social media platform for the younger generations definitely plays a big part in this. But even though it's been just a handful of years, I find this shift almost from, say, the Instagram face of pre-corona to maybe something which I'd maybe call TikTok face, which is kind of the same but different. It's still the synthetic beauty. It still plays by the same beauty standards that are then repeated and multiply through face filters, promoted through face filters, and then which shape our offline beauty standards. But I think the one crucial difference that we've seen is, I guess, through the aestheticization of TikTok trends. There seems to be a new TikTok aesthetic every second, which is pushing the coin forward. But I think one good example would be, maybe, I don't know if you were keeping track with it, but there was these memes talking about what kind of pretty are you? Are you deer pretty? Are you bunny pretty? And it was 4 different animals girls, essentially, and girls comparing their faces to one of these 4 categories. None were better than the others. It wasn't like a hierarchical thing, but it was more just fun, like, oh, I'm bunny pretty, blah, blah, blah. A few weeks after that, or a few months after that, there was another one very similar, which was like, do you have low or high visual weight? And again, it's not meant to be that one's different from the other, but that was this idea that you could be like, hey, I'm a bunny pretty girl with low visual weight. You can categorize yourself. The thing I find interesting about these things is when you actually look at the examples of the memes illustrating these different online beauty categories, let's say, is that all the faces still prescribe to the same homogenized algorithmic beauty standards. So they still, you could say that even though we have the illusion of choice under these different categories, it's still, for the most part, the same Instagram face. It's like just as uncanny. It feels like it's digested into these algorithmic filter bubbles, kind of ready for digital consumption. And I think in the way that pertains to, I guess to go back to your original question about the algorithm and beauty standards, I think it almost feels like we're packaging our faces in the same way as we would do like a text-to-image prompt, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's such a good way of looking at it. That's such an interesting thought.
Yeah, I find like even with AI, I mean, AI face filters going viral on TikTok in whatever different forms. Yeah, it really does feel like that text-to-image prompt quality. It feels like we're here breaking our beauty down into stats to be fed back to the machine. And the thing I almost find the most interesting about this as well is that when I see people on the street, this isn't the type of beauty ideals that I prescribe to when I look at other people and consider like what is attractive or not. But it's this internet coded beauty standard that is made for the machine, which then reflects back to us what beauty standards we feel like we should be prescribing to. So like, whereas it used to be person to person, now it's all really for the machine. And we can see this, like across language as well. We're speaking like machines. We're like mimicking the machine to make sense of the machine, to then make sense of our internet collective identities and communities.
The way you talk about taking features apart and classifying, categorizing them for the machine to then put them back together reminds me of a conversation we had with Felix on this series about individualization and individualization. And I'm curious to know what you think about this contrast between a sort of extreme individualization of a timeline or feed, for example, which is completely curated to me and is unique and different from anyone else's feed, but in contrast with this complete sameness and homogeny of, on the one hand, beauty trends you talked about, which even if they're spliced up into differentiating us into bunnies and deers, result in the same ultimate TikTok beauty standard we apply across the board, as you said. And on the other hand, the sameness of the mid that we talked about at the beginning of the episode. Because yes, my feed is different, but is it just as advertiser friendly and just as mid as your feed, for example? Does it make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think on one hand, because we have access to all information and all niche interests ever now, on one hand, you could say that it's never been easier to access niche content. And also the stuff that was previously seen as niche or underground could be tomorrow's viral phenomena. There's not really anything that does or does not qualify in that sense. At the same time, because of the way that our feeds are curated and personally tailored to our own consumer personal bubbles, we see ourselves reflected back into us, or the machine reflecting what it thinks that we want, which then obviously plays into our desires as well, our consumer desires. But then, on the other hand, because all of our online behavior is digested into data through these algorithms, it creates this very jarring paradox in that we then find ourselves, like a swarm or a hive mind. Everything is bottled into these like UI-friendly keywords and phrases, which do feel very homogenized.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like homogenizing within categories and individualized in their combination, I guess, maybe, but like on a scale that was unprecedented until the internet and its affordances could make this happen. I think it's a very interesting phenomenon from the aspect of researching subjectivity, etc., which we did in some other episodes. So I hope this will be an interesting connection for people listening. Can I ask you to do maybe this is a big job, but what happened to shitposting?
Oh my gosh.
Do you know what I mean? Like what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think the shit posting got co-opted by the corporations, and the moment that happens, it becomes immediately cringe. Mm-hmm. And also, we lost political. I mean, okay, I'm just breaking this down like a highlight reel, real quick. But I mean, okay, maybe we should actually go back and define what shit posting is, perhaps. And
yes, let's do that.
And like this very unfiltered approach to posting that started its roots being very counter to institutions, very unfriendly, algorithmically speaking, and it could become a way to resist. I mean, it was a form of posting as resistance by just being completely absurd or unfiltered, and that was innately funny.
It was a kind of intervention, right? Into the algorithm, I guess.
Yeah.
Could we look at it like that?
No, completely. I mean, I feel like at least at the height of my own personal shit posting, which I'd say was like maybe 2021, and I know a lot of my peers would feel the same way. We were posting so much. I mean, this is before Instagram also tweaked its algorithm, and that was a really big thing. Mm-hmm. I think that might have happened in 2022 or at the tail end of 2021. I need to fact check that. But before then, basically, the more you posted, the more you got boosted up the algorithm. And then there was like a big shift, which meant that apparently posting 10s or 20s of memes on really niche political subcultures would actually get you downvoted, which was quite sad. But yeah, I think there was a special pocket in time before that tweak in the algorithm, especially then, that it was really an exciting form of resistance in many ways. I think also at the same time, then the corporations got hold of shitposting, or like at least started during the pandemic seeing the commercial value, the market value of adopting the language of internet culture. And that happened around the same time as the creator economy. The creator economy was a term that was actually coined by big tech in 2021. Before then, it was just posting. And so I think they, over the pandemic, realized, oh, wait, there's all these people making content. We can find ways to profit off of that. And, you know, just as the story goes with anything, that really zaps away the countercultural or exciting qualities of something. It does get a bit mid and a bit cringe.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that for a while. So this would be corporations using meme language for advertising, calling us bestie, but that's just one aspect. There's also the aspect of full-blown nation states and militaries hijacking these online trends or aesthetics. You've talked about this on your podcast, Logged On, as well. And this year at Transmediale, I saw this amazing lecture performance by Alex Kisho and Nurat Tafesh.
Yes. Yeah, that was so good.
Yeah, it was so good. Were you there?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I love them. Love them
Yeah,
both.
It was so good. So for those listening who don't know, their performance was called She's Evil, Most Definitely Subliminal. And yes, that's a Lana reference. And they explored these cultural artifacts produced by girls online and then connected it to military e-girls, particularly IDF soldiers, employing this Bambi eyes, cute, getting fresh and ready for some genocide trend. And I think Alex Kisho called it operational beauty after operational images. And for more on operational images, I suggest last season's conversations with Anthony Downey and UC Parica. But I digress. So anyway, Günseli, I'd love to hear your takes on aspects of this process when online culture or even countercultural aesthetics and modes of expression, language, and so on get appropriated or built into systems of state violence and oppression.
When you're saying that, my mind kind of pedals back to maybe the beginning of the Ukraine war, when it reached its online heights. And I think it was called the first ever meme war. This was the first instance of mimetic warfare on like a global scale. And that's when you got nation states posting on their official Twitters, or X now, literally posting memes at each other. And you kind of have to stop and think, wow, okay, this is like a literal government. This is a literal nation state. And they're posting a Simpsons meme, which means something is like deeply wrong about our society. It gets so weird. And I mean, there's so many things to say about it. But I guess for me, it really adds to this complete insane sense of unreality that we're living in right now. But yeah, I guess with e-girls, then that almost feels like the next stage. I mean, the first time I wrote about e-girls, it was mostly looking at it from a US perspective, this like one specific influencer called Luhan. But we're definitely seeing it, the kind of model, the kind of ground zero prototype, I guess, for the army e-girl definitely came from the IDF, and that's been going on for a very long time. But I guess recently it's really reached mainstream awareness. And I'm not sure, I would be hesitant to say that it's the government going to an IDF girl and being like, hey, open your eyes up, do X, Y, and Z, do some TikTok dances to distract from genocide. I think it's I think it's more like this just happens to be a 19-year-old girl who is already fluent in the language of the internet, and is the nation state of Israel going to benefit from her using that language as like a PR campaign? Most definitely. And do they encourage it? Probably so. But be hesitant to say that it's like a direct,
Mm-hmm. Where do psyops come into this?
Psyops. I mean, psyops are everywhere.
Maybe let's explain psyops first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess psyops is shorthand for psychological operations. I mean, I think the word is kind of banded around, like the definition has definitely broadened, counter to the official quote unquote capital P psyops definition. I mean, now at least the way it's used online is to refer to any kind of act of government deception to weaponize collective narratives and to control said narratives as well. I'd say like the kind of end goal of the psyoper is to make the receiving end question what's real or what's fake, to the point in which what's real actually stops mattering even, and the discussion actually becomes, it's almost like a distraction tool in itself. We use e-girls as an example of that. So in debating, let's say, is the e-girl a psyop? Is she not? It's actually distracting us from the real conversations and narratives at play, I guess, to kind of break it down to its bare parts. Yeah, to define the psyop, it would be something that works in much the same way as propaganda or advertisements, where information serves as this kind of non-kinetic weapon to shape people's attitudes, to shape their beliefs, to ultimately steer the collective narrative.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any thoughts on the connection between psyops and military e-girl influencers? I mean, isn't that a big or majority part of what constitutes psyop memes as well?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the most recognizable psyop memes. My personal favorites are the 9/11 ones. But we don't need to go into that. I guess the e-girls are also the most pertinent in our current political climate as well. And so maybe it's better to focus on these. The e-girl psyop connection mostly comes from the American e-girl army influencer side of things. And that is essentially the argument that is the US military recruiting people by having e-girls, conventionally attractive e-girl army influencers, essentially post their content on TikTok to make it seem desirable or not. That is the psyop element of it. But you could also say that the psyop is that watching these videos makes you it's easier to deceive people into softening the image of the army or imperialist forces when you're presented with a cute girl with doe eyes, Bambi eyes, just doing the kind of innocent TikTok dances or get ready with me that you'd typically see from just your average online influencer. And they speak the language of the internet, which makes it drops your guard. And so I'd say that that's the real psyop, but a lot of the conversations more around the idea of, oh, has the US Army put this person on TikTok, for instance? And I'm not sure if they've actually got that many recruits doing it that way. Maybe they have. I think a lot of people love to joke about it in the comments, but with everything online, you don't ever really know what's real and what's insincere or ironic. So,
oh yeah, I agree. The most interesting part of this is the phenomenon itself, not really the speculation of whether these may be military funded recruits. But yeah, so moving on, if we try to make some conclusions on this cycle of midness, things have already been extremely mid due to sameness caused by algorithmic curation and the tweaks to it. Then people and shit posters had tried to intervene with new categories of posting that seemed genuine, that intervened in a way, whether with sheer quantity or otherwise. But then all of these forms of expression also got hijacked by corporations and even nation states or militaries, which use it to reproduce and supercharge the very systems that the content was criticizing, commenting on, or, reflecting in that way. And then this just became a vicious cycle, which has led us to now, which just really, the point that we're at is so weird.
Yeah, I mean, when you were saying all of that, in my head, the word that was just like ringing out is like, yeah, this is also fucking weird. And I was watching an interview with Terence McKenna yesterday. It's a very short interview. It's 4 minutes. But he says a really good line. He describes society as the fire in the end house at the end of time. And I think that's a really accurate way of describing, at least phenomenologically, how it feels to be online at the moment with all these different polarizing forces, everything you've just outlined as well. Mm-hmm. I think since consensus reality has completely broken down and we are all forced to piece together our own personal narratives, while arguably being never more aware of the forces used to manipulate or shape our belief systems, there's a lot of different frictions and tensions at play. And I don't think AI helps either if the world wasn't confusing or weird enough. And like I define weird here as anything that sits outside of our understanding of reality or our architecture of reality. But yeah, if the world didn't feel abstract or weird enough, AI is now making us question literally everything. I now see an image these days. I don't know about you, but I'm more inclined to believe when I first see an image that it's been AI generated than believe that it's not been tampered with or it's not real. And that's just really weird.
That's so weird. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts as to the political implications of this vicious cycle we've been talking about, which has led us to the mid-weirdness of ungraspable post-consensus reality? So just, yeah, if you have any speculations, I guess, as to the future developments or how you see them, how you see the future of the post.
I guess to kind of come back full circle, I think as we have algorithms tailor feeding us personalized content, at the moment we're categorized into various bubbles of taste or something, but it won't be long until, especially with AI, everyone will have their completely curated
like our very own echo chambers, like just for one person.
yeah, exactly. It won't be long until we have those, like those tailor-made.
Like I am my own echo chamber.
Exactly. And do you know what the weirdest thing is? Because like, you see so many panopticon memes everywhere. I did philosophy, but like a million years ago. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to like reread this thing about the panopticon and just like refresh my mind. And I guess like the idea is that you're all in your individual cells. And even though that seems basic now because we're so familiar with that image online, I feel like, the kind of end goal is literally that, in that we will all be in our individual cells, looking at each other, yet completely removed. The algorithm will feed us this information, and the fact that it then knows our desires, our consumer desires, mixed with the kind of political incentives that are going to trickle down from political affiliations with big tech, or just the incentives of big tech themselves. It's going to have horribly weird and terrifying implications for the way that politics will go in the future, or political views will be shaped. I think we're already seeing that with selective censorship or complete lack of censorship on platforms like X, where free speech is lauded and then very basic marks of solidarity for, say, Palestine is completely censored. And these echo chambers are already pushing. I read a study the other day that women have never been more left-leaning, and yet men have never been so radicalized. And this was predominantly speaking about Gen Z. But I think this will just keep on creating bigger rifts, bigger polarization. And who's to say? But it's a bit scary to think about sometimes.
Yeah. What a nice light way to conclude.
A nice light conversation.
No, but I mean, this is where we are.
Yeah.
This is the world we're in. This is fine.
Yeah, just
this is fine. Oh, that's such an old meme.
Yeah, literally. Shout out.
Shout out to the
ancient meme.
And it only gets weirder. So thank you so much for your inputs and your sacrifice when immersing yourself into the insane hidden pits of the internet and shedding light for the rest of us.
No, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for going on this journey, this absolutely fried journey.
Yeah, thank you. That was such a fun and interesting conversation for me. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Unreal Data, Real Effects is a series of podcasts conceived and conducted by myself, Neja Berger, for the 15th edition of Tactics in Practice, the discursive program of the Aksioma Institute for Contemporary Art, curated this year by Mediengruppe Bitnik in collaboration with Janez Pakiniansha. For more information on the context, participants, and partners involved, see the links in the description. This episode was recorded and edited by me. The music and audio post-production were taken care of by Gašper Torkar, and the project coordination by Marcela Ukretic. You're welcome to visit aksioma.org, where you'll find a wealth of free content. And if you like what we do, consider supporting us on Patreon or by making a donation. Next week, I'll be joined by art historian and curator Valentina Tani to explore online culture even further. We'll go beyond or around the mid and explore internet aesthetics connected to liminality and landscapes beyond the threshold. That's it for today. Greetings from Ljubljana and na svidenje.
Tactics and Practice Podcast.